Hey friends, so it's time for the next chapter of Goat in the Garden. We finished up the last one where Mandy had met Lydia, Houdini's owner, and they seemed to be friends, but then all of a sudden, once Mandy's dad got there, Lydia changed and she didn't seem very friendly anymore. In fact, she said she liked to do things on her own and she didn't like visitors. So today's chapter is chapter 3, and the only clue it gives us is these big jugs at the top. And if you know anything about farming, these are milk jugs. I've seen them as a little girl when my grandfather had cows, but these we know Lydia has goats, right? And she milks her goats. Goat milk is supposed to be really good for you. So let's read and see what it says about chapter 3. Back at Animal Ark, Mandy offered James a drink of goat's milk from the jar. Well, she asked, eager to share her new love of goats with him. He wrinkled his nose. His face turned red to the roots of his short brown hair. When he spoke, his voice sounded strange. I know I ought to like it, but Mandy grabbed it from him, determined to say it was the most delicious thing she ever tasted. She drank down a gulp of the creamy white milk. Wonderful, she said, but even she had to admit to herself that the taste was rich and strange. I suppose I could get used to it, was all James could manage to say. Mandy shot him a challenging glance. Say what you really think, James Hunter. Go on! James screwed up his face. Okay then. Yuck! Mandy laughed. Well, it says here in my dad's old college book on goats that goat's milk is good for you. It can help with asthma, eczema, and stomach disorders. And that's not just old wives' tales. She passed the book to James, still eager for him to share her excitement. In Asia Minor, she said, pointing at the page over his shoulder, they found a man who was 180 years old, and all he ever drank was goat's milk. See? James wasn't impressed. Where's Asia Minor? He asked. I don't know. Mandy took the jar and the book. She slammed the book shut. She put the jar of milk in the fridge. But I know that from now on, I'm never going to drink anything else. James leaned on the kitchen table and did some quick addition in his head. In that case, you should live to be 168 years from now. Mandy flung a round cracker toward him. Here, catch, she said. James didn't. Too bad my dad and Lydia didn't hit it off. She munched slowly. Still, never mind. I think I'll ride up there tomorrow, right after school, to take her jam jar back. Do you want to come? Secretly, Mandy couldn't wait to get back up to High Cross to visit Lydia and her goats again. To take her jam jar back? James echoed in disbelief. I know we recycle everything and all that, but isn't that a bit much? Why not just take it to the recycling center? Mandy sighed. Sometimes she had to spell things out. It's an excuse, see? To go back to High Cross, to see Houdini. James grinned. I knew that. I just wanted to make you say it. And she chased him around the table, laughing. Mandy and James went up to Lydia's the next day to return the jar. Mandy was nervous as she lifted the loop of rope on the old goat at High Cross. Would Lydia still be angry? Would she still say that she just wanted to be left alone? They found her in the barn, hard at work cleaning out the goat pens. Come on, Jemima. Come on, girl. She coaxed the goat out of the pen, glanced up, saw Mandy and James. Hello there, she said briskly. We brought this back, Mandy said, timidly holding up the clean jar. Ooh, there's a good word. Timidly. Do you know what that means? It means she was kind of shy, maybe feeling a little anxious about holding it up to see how Lydia would respond. Well, thank you very much. Lydia stood up straight. She smiled at them, and all their shy feelings vanished. Now that you're here, why not make yourselves useful? She asked. Mandy grinned at James. Take Jemima for me, please. Hold on to her and let me introduce you to some of the others. That one next door is Lady Jane, and this one's Olivia. Lydia began to count off the goats in their pens. That little one opposite is Monty. The other billy goat, he's one of my favorites. Mandy and James listened and nodded. Once Lydia had finished the list of names, they willingly agreed to help fill the food buckets with oats and barley. Each goat bobbed its head through the keyhole gap and gobbled eagerly. That's right, the best way to a goat's heart is through his stomach, Lydia said with a laugh. The next day or two, while the late cold snap still held the countryside in its grip, Mandy and James got to know everything about goats. They went up regularly to High Cross and learned to clean the pens and lay down clean straw. Then they watched Lydia to learn how to milk a goat. Lydia welcomed them each time with her special smile. "Stand clear," she said, leading one of the goats back into a clean pen. "Steady, Jemima. Steady, girl." Mandy found she could recognize Jemima by the long, thin stripe of white down her back. She watched as Lydia hedged the goat in against the side wall, her head in the far corner. Then Lydia placed the metal pail under the udder and squeezed with each hand in a rhythmical, strong downward movement. Wow, rhythmical. Rhythm is like in music, right? So when you catch the beat of music, that's the rhythm. So when you milk a goat, you got to do it to a rhythm too. Jemima never stirred. "Good girl," Lydia said as the white liquid foamed into the bucket. "Is it easy?" Mandy asked. She'd seen cows being milked in huge milking parlors attached to machines with long tubes from udder to plastic container. But this hand milking looked like a much bigger challenge. "Here," Lydia offered unexpectedly, moving off the stool. By now, she readily gave them jobs, trusted them near her precious animals. "Hold still, Jemima," she said as the goat lifted a back leg, and she sat Mandy down on the stool. "Go on. You have to squeeze one finger at a time in quick succession, not all at once, from the top finger down. That's it. Give it a try." So quick succession, that means one after another. So she's going do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do. Mandy took a deep breath and rested one shoulder against Jemima's flank. She followed Lydia's instructions clumsily at first. To her surprise, the milk began to flow into the bucket. "That's it," Lydia said, nodding. "It's a bit slow until you're used to it, and you're lucky she's a good milker. Not bad for first effort." Mandy frowned with concentration, but as the milk flowed, she felt pleased with her success. "Good girl, Jemima," she said softly. Then she stood up, took the bucket over to the metal churn, and tipped the contents in as Lydia had done. She filtered the milk in through a strainer, then closed the lid of the churn. Look, here's a picture of Mandy milking Jemima. And back behind her, you see her friend James watching. So cool. That's amazing that Mandy got it on her first try like that. It'll cool fast in this weather without running it under cold water. Lydia busied herself with the next pen. "Steady, Alexandra," she said as she opened the next door. Then she turned to James. "Your turn now." James shot Mandy a panicky look, but there was no room to argue with Lydia. Bravely, he entered Alexandra's pen. Lydia was firm and patient. "That's right," she said. "Now, remember what I've told you." Alexandra behaved sweetly as James sat down and began to milk. She never shifted until he'd finished. At last, he emerged with the bucket, grinning at Mandy, and tipped the milk into the churn. Together they went out to the stream for fresh water for the goats. "Great, isn't it?" Mandy asked, looking down the rolling valley to the distant river. "I mean, how can people possibly not like goats?" James nodded. By now, he was a goat fan too. The thaw was late coming to Welford, and even later up at High Cross, where the frost hung on snowdrifts lingered in the shaded side of the blackened dry stone walls. And Mandy noticed every time she visited Lydia that her stock of hay was less. The levels in her great bins of cereals and feeds was even lower. Still, there was no fresh pasture to turn the goats into, and the wind whistled around the beacon as if it were the North Pole. Day by day, Mandy grew more anxious for Lydia and her goats. See, if they don't have hay, and they don't have cereal and feed, and the goats can't go out in the pasture, which is their field, what are they going to eat? Lydia would shake her head, her own face pinched with cold and worry. The goats were perfectly kept, but Mandy couldn't help looking at her and feeling worried. I don't know, Lydia said. It was early one Saturday. Sometimes I wonder how many more winters I can last, especially hard ones like this one. She was standing at the barn door, staring out at the empty, gray, cobbled yard. It's winters that will beat me in the end. Oh, no! Mandy said. A terrible panic shot through her. Lydia mustn't give up. What would happen to her goats? And what would happen to Lydia? Don't say that. I'm sure things will work out okay. But for the moment, Lydia refused to cheer up. I'm clean out of kale and greens of all kind. I'm nearly out of hay, as you see. Poor beasts. They'll starve one of these days. Then briskly she turned, went back inside, and checked Houdini's door. Steady, boy. Houdini popped his head over the stable door and gave Mandy a knowing look. But you can get more food to see you through the last of the winter, Mandy said, trying to be bright and practical. Couldn't you buy some bulk turnips or potatoes? Lydia gave her a glance that spoke volumes. When the goats finally come to kid next month, then I'll have some stocks to sell. I won't like to part with a single one of them, of course, but I'll find good homes, and some people are willing to pay a fair price for a good kid these days. You know what they mean by a kid? She means baby goats, so when the baby goats are born, she can sell some of them. Mandy realized how stupid she'd been to think Lydia could afford extra food for the goats. They'd simply have to hang on until the cold snap ended. Where does the milk go to? James asked, quick to change the subject. He helped fasten the latch on the top part of Houdini's stable door. Then Lydia herself locked the outer barn door. They tramped together across the yard, stomping their feet in the cold. The milk's collected every third day, Lydia took them over to a shed beyond the farmhouse itself. She opened the door and pointed inside to a dozen or more metal churns. This is the cool house. Mr. Wintersgill from down the valley comes up here to collect 16 gallons at a time. She closed the door. He has a cheese factory over in Thirsk. He pays me $150 a gallon, she announced. James and Mandy did their sums. That meant Lydia's income was about 50 pounds a week. My father would never have believed it, Lydia said. Milk brought 1 shilling and 6 pence when he was alive, and he never thought much of goats to keep and earn a living. Of course, feeding a goat is expensive. People think they'll eat any old thing, but they're very particular. A goat won't eat anything spoiled or second rate. Lydia chatted as she showed them down to the gate. James and Mandy turned to say goodbye, but instead an extraordinary sight caught their eye. Look! Mandy pointed up to the barn. Up on the roof! They looked again. There was no mistake. Caught in the perfect silhouette against the gray sky, staring grandly down from the roof, was a goat. Houdini! Lydia shouted, recognizing him at once. Come right down here! How did he get up there? Mandy gasped. He was 7 yards up, standing like the king of the world on the sharp ridge of the roof. You monkey! Lydia called, really cross. She strode back up the path, her brown jacket flapping open. He probably climbed out of his pen. James turned red and hot. It had been his job to leave Houdini safely locked in there. No, it's not your fault, Lydia said. Don't you worry. He's very clever at getting out, just like his namesake. Once he's head-butted and nibbled his way out of his pen, he uses the meal bins as a step up into the hayloft. Then he squeezes out the narrow window and mountaineers up to the outside wall of the barn and onto the roof. And there you are. She stood staring up at Houdini, but he only returned the stare defiantly. Come down here, she called again, shaking her fist. But Houdini had tasted freedom. Why does he climb up there? Mandy said, amazed. He's looking for food, I'm afraid, Lydia said. Houdini tapped a hoof impatiently on the ridge tile, planning his best goat escape route yet. There he goes! Mandy yelled, watching the black silhouette vanish nimbly down the far side of the long roof. They heard only the clatter of hooves. Then silence. They ran and scrambled around the side of the barn, only to see Houdini already making off into the distance, over one low wall, across a meadow, up to a section of wire fence. A stubborn look came over him. His head went down, and he charged the fence post. He withdrew, charged again. At the third charge, just as they had him almost within their grasp, the front fence post toppled, and Houdini slipped through. Now nothing stood between him and the wide world. Houdini! Lydia muttered. Drat! Don't worry, we'll catch him for you, Mandy said. Like James, she felt that it was partly their fault that Houdini had escaped this time. Lydia gave her a weary look. You can try, she said, but I have more milking to do, if you'll excuse me. And she turned to go. Lydia, Mandy protested, you can't just leave him free to wander. Again, the picture of Sam Western and Dennis Seville, shotguns at the ready, flashed before her eyes. And I can't just leave goats in the barn that need milking, Lydia explained. That's what's so hard about running a farm by yourself. The goats get uncomfortable and unhappy if they're not milked on time. She sighed, looking up and down the road for any sign of Houdini. No, I'm afraid we'll just have to wait until he makes his own way back, or until I finish the milking. She shook her head. But what about Mr. Western? Mandy asked. How could Lydia take this so calmly? Lydia paused and considered. I just hope he'll have more sense. Who? Mr. Western? No, Houdini, Lydia said finally as she went back to her work. What will we do? Mandy watched the retreating figure. They'd lost sight of the goat long since. Follow him, James said promptly, and they were on their bikes, riding the rough lane before they had any more time to think. What now? James said as the gates of Upper Welford Hall loomed. Great swirls of gray clouds were settling on the hills all around, threatening rain or maybe even snow. Mandy dismounted from her bike and concentrated on the grass border alongside the tall hedge surrounding Mr. Western's property. And sure enough, there were the telltale cloven hoof marks. He's been through this way, she said, excitement strangling her voice. But the hoof marks finish right here, see? Mandy felt like Sherlock Holmes as she and James crouched to examine the ground. Well, well, said a voice, and what can I do for you two? The two looked up. The voice belonged to Mr. Western. Mandy didn't feel like Sherlock Holmes anymore, more like a little girl caught with her fingers in the candy jar. She said, standing up straight. She felt very red and hot. James stood too and fiddled with the bridge of his glasses, but to their surprise, Mr. Western was looking pleasant and relaxed. He pressed a button and the iron gate swung open. He stepped outside, hands behind his back, immaculate in his green jacket and stylish haircut. Let me guess, he said. You're looking for a goat. They nodded. And you think he might have trespassed in my garden? Again. The pause before the word again sounded very threatening. Oh, no, said Mandy hastily. I'm sure he hasn't. Of course not, James added. They shifted uncomfortably, managing to get the handlebars of their bikes messily entwined. And here they are, talking to Mr. Western. Is Houdini going to be in his yard? Mr. Western made a great show of going back through the gates and peering all around his perfect garden. No goat in there, he reported cheerfully. Why is he being so nice? James whispered behind his back. I don't know, but I don't trust him. Mandy felt very suspicious. Why wasn't he hysterical with worry about his flower beds? So we're going to stop there. We'll see what happens. Did Houdini really get into the gardens? Is Mr. Western telling the truth? You have to join in next time to find out what happens in Goat in the Garden.